The alien's fearful escape. The escape pod shuddered violently as it plummeted through Earth's atmosphere. Inside, Zilara clutched the control panel, her claws trembling. The alarms blared, red lights flashing in every direction. She could barely breathe. The impact was near. Boom! The pod crashed into a dense forest, tearing through the trees before finally coming to a halt. Smoke hissed from the broken machinery. Sparks flew. Silence followed. For a long moment, Zilara didn't move. Pain throbbed through her body. Her arm was twisted at an odd angle, and a deep cut ran along her side. But she was alive. She had escaped the enemy warship. That was all that mattered. She blinked rapidly, her vision blurry. The pod's glass was cracked, revealing the strange blue and green planet outside. Her breath hitched. She knew this world. She had heard the terrifying stories. Earth. A shiver ran down her spine. Humans lived here. Her people, the Velneri, feared humans more than anything in the universe. They were monsters, ruthless killers who devoured anything weaker than them. There were legends of humans trapping aliens, dissecting them, eating their flesh. The very thought sent a fresh wave of panic through her. She had to move. Now. Zilara reached for the emergency lever, gritting her teeth as she pulled it. The hatch door hissed open, letting in the cool air of the night. The forest was dark, the trees towering high, their leaves whispering in the wind. She stumbled out, her legs weak beneath her. The pain was unbearable, but she forced herself to run. She couldn't be found. Each step sent sharp stabs of pain through her body. Blood dripped from her wounds, leaving a faint trail behind. She didn't care. She just needed to get away. The forest stretched endlessly before her, but she kept going, her breath ragged, her body aching. Then she heard it. Footsteps. Her entire body froze. Something was coming. She turned her head, her heart hammering. The sound of crunching leaves grew closer. A shadow moved between the trees. She couldn't see its face, but she knew. A human. Her pulse spiked with terror. She backed away, her injured leg nearly giving out beneath her. Her mind screamed for her to run, but she was too weak. The figure stepped into the moonlight. A tall human male. He had messy brown hair, rough clothing, and carried something in his hand, a long, sharp object, a weapon. Her breath caught. Was this it? Was this how she would die? The human took a slow step forward. His expression was unreadable, his eyes locked onto her. She hissed in fear, her claws raised in a weak attempt to defend herself. He stopped. For a moment, there was only silence. The human studied her, his gaze flickering over her injuries. Then, to her shock, he knelt down and placed his weapon on the ground. Zilara's mind reeled. Why? Why wasn't he attacking? She watched in stunned disbelief as the human slowly reached into his bag and pulled out a metal container. He twisted the cap, and the scent of fresh water filled the air. He was offering her water. She hesitated. Was this a trick? Was he trying to lure her closer so he could strike? The human must have sensed her fear because he took a step back and gently set the container on the ground. His voice was soft when he spoke, the words strange to her ears. Drink. You're hurt. Zilara narrowed her eyes. She didn't trust him, but her throat was dry, her body weak. If she didn't take water, she might not survive the night. Carefully, never taking her eyes off him, she reached out and snatched the container. She sniffed it first. No poison. Then, hesitantly, she took a sip. Cool, clean, life-giving. She wanted to drink more, but her instincts screamed danger. The human still hadn't moved. He was watching her, but not with the hunger she had expected. There was no cruelty in his eyes, no bloodlust. Then, he did something even more shocking. He took off his jacket and slowly extended it toward her. Zilara stiffened. What was this? A trap? A trick? She growled in warning, but the human remained still. He shook the jacket slightly, then placed it on the ground. A sign of what? Peace? She didn't understand. Humans were supposed to kill, conquer, consume. But this one was helping her. Her body swayed. The exhaustion was overwhelming. Her vision blurred again. She tried to stay awake, to keep watching him, to make sure he didn't attack. But her body had reached its limit. As darkness took her, her last thought was filled with fear and confusion. Is this how they prepare their meals? The human's strange kindness. Zilara awoke to warmth. It was wrong. She expected cold metal, the sharp bite of chains, the scent of blood. That was what the stories had told her. Humans captured, tortured, and consumed anything weaker than them. But there was no cage, no instruments of pain. Instead, she was wrapped in something soft. A thick fabric covered her, strange but comforting. Her wounds no longer throbbed as intensely. Something had been applied to them, a healing substance. Her mind fought to make sense of it. Had she been drugged? Her sharp eyes flicked around the dimly lit room. Wooden walls, a fire crackling in the corner, a small space, but not a prison. Then she saw him, the human. He was near the fire, his back turned to her. The sound of bubbling liquid filled the space. A strange, earthly scent drifted through the air. Something rich, something foreign. He was cooking. Panic clawed at her chest. Was he preparing another alien? Was she next? She forced herself up, her body screaming in protest. The movement made the blanket slip off, revealing the bandages wrapped carefully around her wounds. Human fabric, human care. She froze. This wasn't the work of a predator. This was kindness. It made no sense. Her people had always said humans do not help. Humans do not give. They only take. But this one had not only spared her life. He had treated her wounds. Why? The human must have heard her shift because he turned. His eyes locked onto hers. For a brief moment, neither of them moved. She tensed, expecting an attack, but he simply lifted a small container and spoke in that strange, rough human language. You should eat. She hissed in response, baring her fangs. She wasn't a fool. She knew what came next. They always fattened their prey before the slaughter. The human sighed, rubbing the back of his head. He set the container down on a wooden surface between them and took a step back. An offering. Zilara's stomach churned. She needed food, needed energy to fight, to escape. But could she trust it? She reached out slowly, sniffing at the contents. Warm, savory, strange. Definitely not meat. Her narrowed eyes darted to the human. Was this another trick? But then, to her shock, the human grabbed another bowl and ate from it himself. She watched every motion carefully. Not once did he hesitate. Not once did he flinch. Poisoning himself made no sense. It wasn't a trick. Her hunger won over her fear. Slowly, cautiously, she took a bite. Flavor exploded on her tongue. Warm, soft, unlike anything she had ever tasted before. It wasn't alien flesh, wasn't something stolen from another life. It was simply food. She swallowed. The human gave a small nod, satisfied. For the first time, Zilara felt a flicker of something foreign. Doubt. What if her people had been wrong? What if not all humans were monsters? The hunter becomes the hunted. Zilara had stopped expecting death. For days she had watched the human. He had not hurt her. He had not chained her. He had not forced her into anything. He had simply let her exist. It was unnerving. She sat near the fire, wrapped in the human's spare jacket, staring at the food he had given her. Her mind warred with itself. This wasn't supposed to happen. She was supposed to be hunted, captured, or worse. Instead, the human, Alex, acted as if she were just another lost creature needing help. But Zilara knew better. Predators were patient. And yet, he had turned his back to her more times than she could count. No human would be that foolish with an enemy in their home. Unless He did not see her as one. She flexed her claws. What if she killed him right now? What if she ended this strange game before he could? Her tired body refused. The wound on her side had nearly healed. The bandages, his bandages, had stopped the bleeding, and the strange, thick paste he had applied made the pain disappear faster than she expected. No human should be capable of healing a Valneri this quickly. And yet here she was. She needed answers. That night, when Alex left the cabin to fetch more firewood, she slipped out. She needed to see the world beyond this place, to see if other humans were like him. The village of monsters. The town was not far. Lights burned in the darkness, loud voices filling the air. Unlike Alex's small, quiet home, the settlement was alive. Zilara crouched in the shadows, her alien eyes adjusting to the brightness. Humans moved in packs. They laughed, shouted, bartered in strange, guttural voices. But then, she saw something that made her blood freeze. A cage. Inside it, a Valneri. His body was bruised, his forearms chained, his face barely recognizable. Her kind. One of her own. Her claws dug into the earth. So, the stories were true. Humans did capture Valneri. They did experiment on them. Alex had only been an exception, a trick of fate. This was the reality. Her heartbeat pounded in her ears. She had to go back. She had to leave Devour. A voice sliced through the noise. Something's been seen in the forest. Zilara stilled. A group of men stood around a fire, their weapons at their sides. Tracks lead near the old cabin. One of them muttered, lighting a cigarette. "Think it's a beast." Another man scoffed. Or something else. "A lot of weird things have been happening lately." Then came the words that made her stomach drop. "We should check the cabin. See if the hermit's hiding anything." They meant Alex. They were coming for him. Zilara's pulse raced. She had led them to him. She turned and ran. The unthinkable betrayal. Zilara ran like death itself chased her. Her limbs burned, her breath came in sharp gasps. But she didn't stop. The humans were coming. Not for her. For Alex. It should not have mattered. He was not her kind. She should have let him die. But her body refused. Her mind refused. He had saved her. He had given her food, shelter, safety. He had done the impossible. He had treated an alien like an equal. And now, because of her, he would suffer. The cabin appeared between the trees, glowing faintly from the fire inside. Zilara didn't stop. She slammed the door open, her chest heaving. Alex stood near the fire, startled. "Zilara." She grabbed his wrist, clawed fingers wrapping around his rough skin. "They're coming," she gasped. He didn't ask who. He didn't ask why. His face darkened. Then, the first gunshot rang through the forest. The betrayal. The windows shattered. Alex grabbed her arm and pulled her down just as another shot blasted through the wooden wall. "Basement," he ordered. Zilara's instincts screamed at her to run. She wasn't used to being protected. She had always been the one hiding, the one fleeing. But Alex was fighting for her. He grabbed a rifle from the wall and moved swiftly, not toward the basement, but toward the door. He was going to face them. Zilara hissed, "You're outnumbered." Alex didn't flinch. "So are they." Before she could stop him, he stepped outside. Zilara's breath caught. The hunters stood in the clearing, their weapons raised, their faces cold. 5 of them, armed, ready. Alex held his rifle loosely at his side. "You're trespassing." The leader, a broad-shouldered man with scars along his jaw, smirked. "We know what you're hiding." Alex didn't move. His grip on the rifle remained steady. "I don't know what you're talking about." Zilara pressed herself against the doorway, her heart pounding. She expected Alex to betray her, to hand her over to save himself. But instead, he did something unthinkable. He lowered his gun and stood in front of the door. A shield. For her, The scared man's smirk faded. You really want to die for an alien, Mercer? Zalara's breath hitched. He knew Alex. Alex's voice was quiet but firm. Go home, Caleb. Zalara felt ice crawl down her spine. Caleb. The name meant nothing to her, but the way Alex said it, heavy, bitter, pained, meant everything. This wasn't just any human hunter. This was Alex's brother, the Great Escape. Alex's hands never wavered. He stood firm between Zalara and the hunters, his grip loose but steady on his rifle. The firelight flickered against his face, but his eyes remained locked on the man in front of him. His brother. Zalara's mind spun. A blood connection. She had seen it before. Loyalty to kin, an unbreakable bond between flesh and blood. Humans were no different from her own kind in that way. And yet Alex had chosen her. Step aside, Mercer, Caleb said, his tone laced with warning. I'm only gonna ask once. Silence. The other hunters shifted, gripping their weapons tighter. They didn't want to talk. They wanted a kill. Zalara's claws tightened into fists. Alex finally spoke. She's not a threat. Laughter. Sharp. Cruel. She's a damn alien, Caleb sneered. That's threat enough. Zalara's chest burned. There it was. The truth. To them, she wasn't a person, not something that could think, feel, exist beyond what they understood. Just a target. A trophy. The last of her doubt vanished. She would not let them take her. And she would not let them take Alex either. The first shot. It happened fast. A flick of a finger. A flash of fire. The first gunshot rang through the trees. Alex shoved Zalara down as the bullet ripped past them, splintering the cabin's wooden wall. They weren't waiting anymore. They were here to kill. Adrenaline kicked in. Zalara moved on instinct, her body reacting faster than thought. She grabbed the nearest object, a metal lantern, and hurled it. Crash. Glass shattered. Fire exploded into the clearing, sending embers flying. The hunters flinched back. Just a second. That's all she needed. Move, Alex barked. Zalara didn't hesitate. She bolted toward the trees, Alex at her side. Bullets tore through the night, missing them by inches. The forest became a blur, branches slashing at her skin as she ran. Alex kept up, his breath harsh, his hands steady. He knew this land. He was leading her somewhere. Then she heard it, the sound of roaring water. A river. An escape. But Caleb wasn't done. A bullet clipped Alex's arm. He staggered, his face twisting in pain. Zalara whirled, fury igniting in her chest. The hunters were closing in, and she was done running. The alien fights back. They had made one mistake. They thought she was weak. Zalara turned and leaped. She moved faster than any human could react, her claws slashing through the air. The first hunter never had a chance, her hand clamped around his throat, slamming him into the ground. The second tried to aim his gun. She ripped it from his grasp and drove her knee into his gut. A third lunged with a knife. She caught his wrist, twisted, and sent him sprawling. Caleb watched, his face twisting into something between shock and anger. She's not just some lost alien, is she? He muttered. Alex, gripping his wounded arm, spat blood onto the dirt. No, he said. She's better than you. Zalara stood over the fallen hunters, her breath heavy, her blood burning. She expected Caleb to fight. Instead, he smiled. You don't get it, do you? He murmured. Even if you kill me, more will come. She's not safe. You're not safe. Alex stared him down. That's why we're leaving. Caleb's smirk faded. Leaving? Zalara felt a jolt of surprise. She hadn't planned for that. Alex exhaled, pain in his voice. This is my home, but not anymore. He turned to Zalara. We have to disappear. She met his gaze and nodded. Together, They ran toward the river, toward the unknown. But at least for the first time, they weren't alone. The truth about humans. Water swallowed them whole. The river's current was faster than Zilara expected. Cold, violent, unforgiving. It pulled at her, threatening to drag her under. For a moment, she fought. Instinct told her to kick, claw, fight for the surface. Then, a hand grabbed hers. Alex. Even through the chaos, he didn't let go. Together, they broke the surface, gasping for air as the current carried them away from death. Behind them, Caleb's shouts faded into the distance. The gunfire had stopped. They were gone. They had escaped. For now, the struggle to survive. By the time they crawled onto the riverbank, Zilara's limbs were lead. Alex collapsed beside her, his chest heaving. His injured arm bulged into the mud. She turned to him. Something inside her twisted. He had taken a bullet for her. He had lost everything for her. And now he was dying because of her. We have to stop the bleeding. Her voice was sharp, urgent. Alex gritted his teeth. There's a town a few miles south. I know a guy. He can. No. Zilara's claws tore through the fabric of his sleeve. She examined the wound, calculating. The bullet hadn't gone deep, but it had to come out. Alex's brows furrowed. I thought your people believed humans were monsters. She met his gaze. Some are. Asterisk, asterisk, but not you, asterisk, asterisk. Then, before he could protest, she dug her claws into the wound. Alex let out a strangled curse. His entire body tensed. Zilara worked quickly, fingers slick with his blood. The bullet was lodged near the surface. She twisted, pulled, and it came free. Alex groaned, his body sagging. Zilara exhaled. That was the easy part. Now came the real danger. Humans were fragile. Without proper care, infection would set in. He would die. And she refused to let that happen. A debt repaid. The forest was silent as she worked. She chewed a few bitter leaves she had gathered, crushing them into a thick, stinging paste. The plants here weren't the same as the ones on her world, but she could still make medicine. Alex didn't speak. He only watched. Finally, as she pressed the paste into his wound, he murmured, "You didn't have to do this." Zilara paused. "You didn't have to save me either." His lips twitched into something almost like a smile. Then, exhaustion took him. His head slumped back against the grass, his breath steady but weak. Zilara watched him sleep. For the first time in her life, she was caring for a human. And for the first time, she wasn't afraid of one. The hunter returns. They had only a few hours of peace. The sun was just beginning to rise when Zilara heard it, the sound of boots crushing leaves. Her entire body went still. She turned sharply. Alex was still out cold. He wouldn't be able to fight. Slowly, she rose. Every muscle in her body tensed. The footsteps stopped. Then, Caleb stepped into the clearing. Alone. His gun was gone. His hands were empty. But his expression was worse than anger, worse than hate. It was something close to pity. "You really think this is over?" he said quietly. Zilara bared her teeth. "You lost." Caleb chuckled. "No, alien. You don't get it. I wasn't the only one looking for you." She stilled. "The government's been tracking alien activity for years. When they find you, they'll take more than just you. They'll take him too." Her blood ran cold. This wasn't just about her anymore. Alex was in danger because of her. Caleb's voice softened. "You want him to live." Zilara clenched her fists. What kind of question was that? Caleb took a slow step forward. Then leave him. Her heart pounded against her ribs. Was this the only way? She had spent her entire life believing humans were nothing but killers. That her kind was alone in the universe, hunted, feared. But Alex had changed everything. And now she had to decide. Run or stay. Abandon him or fight. She looked down at Alex's face, peaceful in sleep, and made her choice. The final choice. Zilara had never hesitated before. Survival was instinct. She had run, fought, bled, done whatever it took to live. But this was different. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for him. Alex lay motionless beside her, his body weak but still breathing. And in front of her, Caleb stood waiting, his word tongue heavy in the air. You want him to live. Then leave him. Zilara's claws curled into fists. Leave. It was the only logical choice. If she ran, Alex could return to his life. The hunters would stop chasing him. The humans wouldn't punish one of their own for harboring an alien. But she knew the truth. They wouldn't let him go. Not after what he had done. Not after choosing her. She stepped forward. And for the first time in her life, she didn't run. The last stand. No. Caleb blinked. What? Zilara squared her shoulders, her stance no longer defensive, but defiant. I'm not leaving him. Caleb sighed. I figured you'd say that. Then, he reached for his gun. Zilara moved first. She lunged, closing the distance before he could even raise his weapon. Her claws slammed into his wrist, twisting the gun free. Caleb staggered back, but he was fast, too fast. He caught her arm, driving his elbow into her ribs. Pain exploded through her side, but she didn't let go. They struggled, two forces colliding. Hunter and hunted. Predator and prey. But this time, she wasn't the prey. Caleb managed to throw her off, stepping back and drawing a knife. Breathless, bleeding, he smiled. You don't get it, he panted. Even if you kill me, they'll still come for you. Zilara wiped blood from her lip, then let them come. Caleb lunged. A gunshot rang out. Caleb's body jerked backward. Zilara turned. Alex was awake. He sat slumped against a tree, rifle in his shaking hands. His breathing was ragged, his eyes sharp. Caleb swayed, clutching his side. His face twisted, not in pain, but in disappointment. You shot me, he murmured. Alex's expression didn't change. Should have done it years ago. Caleb stumbled, then collapsed to his knees. The fight was over. The choice that changed everything. The world was still. Zilara turned to Alex. He was pale, exhausted, but alive. She moved toward him, kneeling. We need to go, she said quietly. Now. He gave a weak chuckle. You finally saying we? Zilara hesitated. She had never belonged anywhere. Never trusted anyone. But Alex, he had risked everything for her. He had fought for her when no one else would. She offered her hand. For the first time, she was willing to fight for someone else. Alex took it. She pulled him to his feet, and together they disappeared into the forest, leaving behind the world they once knew. The hunt never ends. Days passed. The hunters never found Caleb's body. And the humans never stopped searching. But by the time they arrived, the cabin was empty. No tracks, no bodies, nothing but ashes. Far away, deep in uncharted lands, a human and an alien moved together under the same sky. No longer predator and prey, but something else entirely.